The coins hit the counter, one at a time. Quarters first, then dimes, then pennies, the kind most people wave away without a second thought. But Jack Briggs counted every one, carefully, deliberately, the way a man counts when he knows the number has to be exact because there is no backup plan waiting behind it. The cashier, a young woman, maybe 22, name tag reading Danny, watched with patient eyes at first. She had seen slow transactions before, coupons, cards that didn't swipe on the first try, customers who needed an extra moment. She was used to it. But something about this felt different. This was a man in his late 70s, wearing a faded olive jacket and a worn Army veteran cap, standing at Register 3 of a quiet grocery store in Carmel, California, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, counting coins the way a person counts when every single one carries weight. His basket had held only 4 things: bread, eggs, milk, a small pack of lunch meat. Nothing extra, nothing indulgent, just the bare minimum a man needs to move through a few days without going hungry. The total had come to $18.73. Jack had reached into his wallet, the old kind, leather worn soft at the edges from decades of use, and found no bills, only coins. He hadn't flinched when he saw that. He had simply begun to count, quietly, without explanation. And the line behind him had begun to grow. 2 people, then 3, then 4. A man in a business suit checked his watch. A woman shifted her weight from one foot to the other. A teenager stared down at his phone, not watching but somehow communicating impatience through every muscle in his body. Jack didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the coins. $16.26. He stopped. His hands went still. Not trembling from age, his hands had steadied themselves through worse than this. They were still because the counting was over, and the number wasn't enough, and some part of him already knew it before he finished. $2.47 short. Danny looked at the total on her screen, then at Jack. Her voice was calm, careful, the way you speak to someone when you're trying not to make something worse. "Sir, you're a little short. You'll need to put something back." Jack didn't respond immediately. He just stood there, bread in one hand, the coin still loose in his palm, as if the act of choosing which item to return meant choosing how much hunger he was willing to accept that week. The line waited. The store hummed around him. Refrigerator units, distant shopping carts, the soft beep of registers on either side. And Jack Briggs, a man who had once slept on wet ground in Vietnam, who had carried wounded men on his back through jungle heat, who had come home to a country that wasn't always sure how to look at him, stood at a grocery register in his hometown and felt the full, quiet weight of being seen at his lowest. "I'll put something back," he said softly. He looked at the milk, then the lunch meat, then the bread. Each item wasn't just food. Each one represented a meal, a morning, a day he could get through without the hollow ache that had become too familiar in recent years. His eyes settled on the milk. "Just the bread and eggs," he said. "I'll leave the rest." He reached for the milk carton to hand it back. And that was the moment Clint Morrison stepped forward. Welcome back to Jack and Rex Tales, the place where real stories live. Stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories that remind us what we're made of and what we owe each other. Stay with us. This one matters. Nobody had really noticed Clint standing in line. That was simply the kind of man he was, present without demanding attention, watching without staring. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, wearing a plain button-down shirt and a simple cap, holding a small basket with a coffee and a newspaper. Nothing about him said important, nothing about him said look at me, but he had been watching Jack since the counting started. Not the way the others watched, with impatience or pity or awkward fascination. He watched the way someone watches when they recognize something. When they see not just a man struggling at a register, but a whole life compressed into one quiet, painful moment. He set his basket down on the belt and stepped forward. "Ring it all up together," he said to Danny. His voice was calm, unhurried. "His items and mine." Jack turned around. Confusion first, then something close to embarrassment. He shook his head slowly. "Sir, I can't let you do that." Clint looked at him, not with pity, not with the performative warmth of someone who wanted to feel good about themselves. He looked at him the way one man looks at another when the words are simple, and he means every one of them. "You're not letting me do anything," Clint said. "I'm buying my coffee. Your groceries just happen to be in front of mine." Jack opened his mouth to protest again. Clint had already turned back to Danny. "All together, please." There was a pause, a brief, suspended moment where the whole small world of Register 3 seemed to hold its breath. Then Danny nodded and began scanning. Jack stood with the coins still in his hand. He didn't know where to look. A man his age, with the history he carried, didn't accept help easily. Pride wasn't vanity for men like Jack. It was the last wall standing between them and the feeling that everything they'd endured had somehow still not been enough. But there was something in the way Clint had done it. No announcement, no look around the store to see if anyone was watching, no deep sigh of generosity. Just a quiet, matter-of-fact decision, the way you hold a door open for someone, not because you want credit, but because it's simply the right thing, and there's no reason to make it larger than it is. Jack slowly closed his fingers around the coins. While Danny processed the payment, Clint glanced over. "What branch?" he asked. Simple, conversational, the way veterans ask, not to impress, just to acknowledge. Jack looked up. Something in the question unlocked him slightly. "Army," he said. "Vietnam, 68 to 70. Clint gave a single nod, slow, respectful. "Thank you for your service." Jack had heard those words hundreds of times over the decades, at parades, at airports, from politicians on television who had never laced up a boot. The words had become so routine that they'd lost their edges, polished smooth from overuse until they felt like nothing at all. But the way Clint said it, quiet, direct, with no audience in mind, made them feel like something again, like they actually meant what they were supposed to mean. "Thank you," Jack said, and he meant that too. Danny slid the receipt across the counter. Jack took it slowly, stared at it for a moment, the full total, paid, every item accounted for, his bread, his eggs, his milk, his lunch meat, all of it. He folded the receipt carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. Then he looked up at Clint, really looked, the way you look at someone when you're finally ready to see them, and something shifted in his face. A slow recognition, like a word you've been trying to remember suddenly arriving. "Wait," his voice dropped. "Are you Clint Morrison?" Clint smiled, small, understated. Just picking up coffee. Jack stared at him for a long moment. His eyes grew wet at the edges, though he held himself steady the way men of his generation hold themselves, upright, even when everything inside is moving. "I know who you are," Jack said quietly. "I've seen your work for years." Clint waited, giving him the space to finish. "After I came back from the war," Jack paused, swallowed. "Things weren't right for a long time. People didn't understand what we'd been through. Some days it was hard to find a reason to keep going." He looked down briefly, then back up. "But the stories you told, the characters you brought to life, men who were broken but kept going anyway, they helped me more than I know how to say." The store had gone quiet around them without anyone deciding to make it quiet. People had simply stopped. A woman near the magazine rack, a man by the dairy case. Even the teenager with the phone had looked up. Clint was still for a moment. Then he said softly, "You lived through the real thing. I just played a version of it." Jack shook his head slowly. "Don't say just. Don't ever say just." A woman who had been standing 2 places back in the line stepped forward. She was perhaps 50, dark coat, grocery bags already in her hands. She reached out and pressed folded bills into Jack's free hand. "For the next time things get hard," she said simply, and stepped back. Jack looked down at the money in his hand. Before he could speak, another person stepped forward, a man in a pressed shirt, the businessman who had checked his watch earlier, his expression entirely different now, placed 2 folded 50s on top. Then a young mother with a toddler on her hip, $20, placed gently, like something fragile. Then a store employee, young, still in his apron, quietly added what he had in his wallet without a word. No one made a speech. No one looked around for approval. They just came forward, one at a time, the way people come forward when one person has already shown them it's safe to care. Jack stood in the middle of it with tears running down his face and no effort left to stop them. He had walked into that store that morning, feeling like a man the world had moved on from, like someone who had given everything he had to give in a jungle thousands of miles away, and come home to a life that slowly, quietly, ran out of room for him. He had stood at that register feeling invisible in the worst possible way, not unseen, but seen and overlooked, present but no longer counted. He walked out into the pale California morning with his groceries in one hand and something far heavier and far lighter in the other. The feeling that he still mattered, that he had never stopped mattering, that sometimes the world just needs one person to act before everyone else remembers who they wanted to be. Clint Morrison drove home that morning and didn't mention what had happened to anyone. It wasn't a story he told. It was simply a Tuesday, a cup of coffee, a few dollars, a moment that cost him almost nothing and meant everything to someone else. The store manager, a quiet man named Gerald, had watched the whole thing from behind the service desk. He couldn't stop thinking about it for days. A month later, he worked with the store's ownership to establish a small, discreet assistance fund. No signs, no announcements, specifically for customers who came up short. Veterans first, elderly residents on fixed incomes, anyone who stood at a register the way Jack had stood there, counting what they had and finding it not enough. Because of one Tuesday morning, something permanent was built. Jack Briggs passed away 11 months later. peacefully in the home he had lived in for 40 years, surrounded by the few people who loved him most. At his small service, his daughter stood up and said something that stayed with everyone in that room. He talked about that day in the store more than almost anything in the last year of his life. Not because of the money, not even because of who Clint was, but because of how it made him feel. She paused. He said it was the first time in years that he felt like the world remembered he was still here. She folded her hands. That's all any of us really need, isn't it? Just to know we're still here, still seen, still worth someone's quiet moment of grace. There is something this story asks us to sit with long after it ends. We live in a world that moves fast and rewards visibility, the loudest voices, the biggest gestures, the moments designed to be noticed. But real kindness rarely looks like that. Real kindness looks like Clint Morrison setting down a basket and saying 4 words without checking to see who was watching. It looks like a woman pressing money into a stranger's hand without asking his name. It looks like a store manager who couldn't sleep until he'd built something that would outlast the moment. There is a dignity to aging that we don't talk about enough in this country. Men and women who gave their youth, sometimes their health, sometimes their peace of mind, in service of something larger than themselves, and who find themselves in their final years navigating a world that has largely stopped making room for them. They don't ask for much, they were raised not to, but that doesn't mean they don't feel the absence of being seen. And there is something equally important in what this story teaches about hesitation. Every person in that line noticed what was happening, every single one. But it took one person to move before the rest remembered they were capable of moving too. That is the quiet power of a single act of courage. Not the grand kind, not the kind that makes the news, but the ordinary human courage of stepping forward when it would be just as easy to look away. We carry more influence than we realize, not because of our titles or our wealth or how many people know our names, but because of what we do in the small, unremarkable moments, at a register, in a parking lot, in a hallway, when someone needs to be reminded that the world still has room for them. Jack Briggs knew that by the end. And now, so do you. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs a reminder of what people are capable of. Leave a comment below and tell us about a moment when a stranger showed up for you, or when you showed up for someone else. Those stories matter. They always have. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.